A miracle in the church. What a tearful mother saw when she cried out to God shocked everyone. She approached and Amanda Peterson stood at her kitchen window, watching the autumn leaves dance in the morning breeze. The Georgia sun cast a warm glow over her modest Atlanta home, a testament to years of hard work as a single mother. At 32, she had built a stable life for herself and her 4-year-old daughter, Grace, working as a pediatric nurse at Emory University Hospital. "Mommy, can we go to the park today?" Grace's voice chimed from behind her, pulling Amanda from her thoughts. Turning around, she found her daughter clutching her favorite stuffed elephant, her chestnut curls still messy from sleep. "Of course, sweetheart," Amanda smiled, kneeling to brush Grace's hair away from her face. "But first breakfast, how about blueberry pancakes?" Grace's eyes lit up, a mirror image of her mother's hazel gaze. "With honey?" "With honey," Amanda confirmed, lifting her daughter onto a kitchen stool. As she prepared their breakfast, Amanda couldn't help but marvel at how Grace had become her entire world. After Grace's father had abandoned them during the pregnancy, Amanda had sworn to give her daughter everything she never had: stability, love, and an unwavering presence in her life. The morning unfolded like any other Saturday, filled with laughter and the simple joy of being together. They made their way to Grant Park, their favorite weekend spot, where the autumn colors painted a picturesque scene. Grace clutched a new kite in her small hands, a birthday gift from Amanda's colleague at the hospital. "Remember what I taught you about flying kites?" Amanda asked, helping Grace unwind the string. "Hold on tight and run with the wind," Grace exclaimed, bouncing with excitement. The park was relatively quiet that morning, with only a few other families scattered across the vast green space. Amanda watched as Grace ran across the grass, her pink dress fluttering in the breeze, the kite trailing behind her like a faithful companion. These were the moments that made every struggle worthwhile, the pure, unfiltered joy of her daughter's laughter. "Look, Mommy, it's flying," Grace called out, her face beaming with pride as the kite caught an updraft and soared higher. Amanda captured the moment with her phone, already imagining how this would join the collection of precious memories documented on her Instagram. "You're doing great, sweetie. Just like a pro." The peaceful scene shattered in an instant. The screech of tires against asphalt pierced the air. Amanda's head snapped toward the sound, her nurse's instincts already firing alarm signals through her body. A black SUV had veered off Cherry Street, jumping the curb and careening toward the park. Behind the wheel, the driver appeared unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel. Time seemed to slow down, stretching like molasses as Amanda's eyes found Grace. Her daughter stood frozen, the kite string still clutched in her tiny hands, directly in the vehicle's path. "Grace!" Amanda's scream tore through the park. She was already running, her feet barely touching the ground, but the distance between them felt infinite. "Drop the kite! Run!" Grace turned toward her mother's voice, confusion clouding her features. The kite danced above her head, oblivious to the impending danger. The SUV plowed through the grass, leaving deep gouges in its wake. In the final seconds before impact, Amanda saw Grace finally register the danger. Her daughter's eyes widened with fear, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise. She dropped the kite string and tried to run, but her small legs couldn't carry her fast enough. The impact was devastating. The SUV clipped Grace before Amanda could reach her, sending her small body flying through the air like a rag doll. She landed 20 feet away, crumpling on the grass in a way that would haunt Amanda's nightmares forever. The vehicle continued its trajectory until it crashed into a tree, its horn blaring in an endless wail. "No, no, no." Amanda reached Grace's side, her medical training warring with maternal panic. She fought the urge to gather her daughter in her arms, knowing that moving her could cause more damage. Grace lay unnaturally still, a small trickle of blood running from her nose. "Someone call 911!" Amanda screamed, her trembling fingers finding Grace's pulse point. The heartbeat was there, but weak and irregular. "Stay with me, baby, please stay with me." Other parkgoers rushed to help, some attending to the unconscious driver, others forming a protective circle around Amanda and Grace. Someone draped a jacket over Grace's still form, while another person reported vital signs to the emergency dispatcher. The wail of sirens grew louder, but for Amanda the world had narrowed to the shallow rise and fall of Grace's chest. She kept talking, her voice hoarse with fear and unshed tears. "Mommy's here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay. You have to be okay." The paramedics arrived with practiced efficiency, gently but firmly moving Amanda aside to work on Grace. She watched as they stabilized her daughter's neck, attached monitors, and communicated in clipped professional tones that Amanda understood all too well from her own medical background. Severe head trauma, possible internal injuries, BP dropping. They loaded Grace into the ambulance and Amanda climbed in beside her, clutching her daughter's limp hand. The paramedic worked steadily, establishing an IV line and monitoring vital signs. Amanda recognized the gravity in his expression, the same look she had worn countless times when treating critical patients. At Emory University Hospital, Amanda's colleagues met them at the emergency entrance. Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of pediatric neurology and Amanda's friend, was already waiting. "Take her straight to CT," Dr. Chen ordered, squeezing Amanda's shoulder as she passed. "Amanda, let us take care of her. You know the drill." But knowing the drill as a nurse was entirely different from experiencing it as a mother. Amanda found herself guided to a private waiting room, the same one where she had comforted countless families. Now she was the one pacing the floor, jumping at every footstep in the hallway. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Chen entered the room. The expression on her face made Amanda's knees buckle. "Amanda, please sit down," Sarah said gently, guiding her to a chair. The impact caused severe trauma to Grace's brain. There's significant swelling and evidence of bleeding. We need to operate immediately to relieve the pressure. But I need to be honest with you. Even if she survives the surgery, the damage is extensive. "What are you saying?" Amanda whispered, though she already knew the answer. "Based on the scans, even in the best-case scenario, Grace may never regain consciousness, and if she does..." Sarah paused, her professional demeanor cracking slightly. "The likelihood of her remaining in a permanent vegetative state is very high." The words hit Amanda like physical blows. She doubled over, a keening sound escaping her throat. Sarah held her as she broke down, offering the comfort of friendship alongside medical truth. "We'll do everything we can," Sarah promised. "The surgical team is prepping now. But Amanda, you need to prepare yourself for what's ahead." Amanda straightened up, wiping her eyes. "I want to see her before surgery." They walked to the pre-op area, where Grace lay surrounded by machines and monitors. Her daughter, usually so full of life, looked tiny and broken on the hospital bed. Amanda leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Grace's forehead. "Fight, my brave girl," she whispered. "Mommy loves you so much. Please fight." As they wheeled Grace away, Amanda stood rooted to the spot, the morning's events playing on loop in her mind. Just hours ago, they had been making pancakes and flying kites. Now she was facing every parent's worst nightmare, with no guarantee that her daughter would ever wake up again. The nightmare had only begun. The surgical waiting room became Amanda's personal purgatory. Hours stretched into an eternity as Grace underwent emergency surgery to reduce the swelling in her brain. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly, each second punctuated by the echo of her daughter's laughter from that morning, a memory that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from surgery after 6 hours, her surgical cap still in place and exhaustion evident in her stance. Amanda rose on shaky legs, reading her friend's face with the precision that came from years of medical training. "We've managed to stabilize her," Sarah began, gesturing for Amanda to sit. "The surgery itself was successful in relieving the pressure, but the next 48 hours will be critical. She's being transferred to the pediatric intensive care unit." Amanda nodded mechanically, her nurse's mind processing the medical implications while her mother's heart screamed in anguish. "What are her chances, Sarah? Please, be honest with me." Sarah's professional demeanor softened slightly. "The trauma to her brain was extensive, Amanda. Right now she's in a deep coma, registering a 3 on the Glasgow coma scale. We'll monitor her closely, but you need to understand, recovery from this type of injury is extremely rare." The words hung heavy in the air between them. Amanda knew the Glasgow coma scale intimately. A score of 3 was the lowest possible rating, indicating no eye-opening, no verbal response, and no motor response. It was the medical equivalent of standing on the precipice between life and death. In the PICU, Grace lay surrounded by a fortress of medical equipment. Tubes and wires connected her small body to various monitors, each one tracking a different aspect of her fragile existence. The rhythmic whoosh of the ventilator breathing for her daughter created a haunting melody that would become the soundtrack to Amanda's vigil. Days began to blur together. Amanda took an indefinite leave from work, spending every possible moment by Grace's bedside. Her savings, carefully built over years of frugal living, began to dwindle under the mounting medical bills. Insurance covered part of the expenses, but the specialized care Grace required far exceeded the coverage limits. 2 weeks after the accident, Amanda sat in the hospital's financial services office, staring at numbers that seemed to swim before her eyes. "Ms. Peterson," the financial counselor said gently, "I understand this is overwhelming, but we need to discuss payment arrangements. The current balance is approaching $300,000, and with ongoing care, that number will continue to grow." Amanda's hands trembled as she held the stack of bills. I can arrange a payment plan. My house, I could take out a second mortgage. That might help in the short term," the counselor nodded, "but given the long-term prognosis, you might want to consider other options. There are state assistance programs, and in cases like this—" "I'm not giving up on her," Amanda interrupted, her voice sharp. "She's going to wake up, she has to." Later that evening, as Amanda sat beside Grace's bed, a soft knock at the door drew her attention. Pastor John Morrison stood in the doorway, his kind face etched with concern. She had seen him several times in the hospital corridors, offering comfort to other families, but they had never spoken. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. "I've noticed you here every day, and I thought you might want to talk." Amanda hesitated. Before the accident, she had never been particularly religious, finding more faith in science than scripture. But 2 weeks of watching her daughter lie motionless had begun to crack her certainties. "Please come in," she finally said. Pastor Morrison pulled up a chair, his presence somehow making the sterile hospital room feel less oppressive. "I'm John," he said simply, "and you're Amanda. The nurses speak very highly of you." "I used to work here," Amanda explained, her fingers absently stroking Grace's hand. Before this." "Tell me about her," John encouraged, nodding toward Grace. The dam broke. Amanda found herself pouring out everything. The morning of the accident, the kite dancing in the wind, the horrible screech of tires, and the endless days since. John listened without interruption, his eyes reflecting a deep understanding that suggested personal familiarity with grief. "I don't know how to keep going," Amanda admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "Every day I watch the monitors, hoping for any sign of change. The doctors, they're already talking about long-term care facilities, as if I should just accept that my 4-year-old daughter will never wake up." John was quiet for a moment before speaking. 3 years ago, I lost my wife to cancer," he said softly. "I watched her fade away, and I questioned everything I believed in. My congregation needed me to be strong, to have answers, but I felt hollow inside." Amanda looked at him with surprise. It wasn't the typical pastoral response she had expected. "The thing about faith," he continued, "is that it's not about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about having the strength to face the questions. Your love for Grace, that's its own kind of faith." Before Amanda could respond, one of the monitors began beeping insistently. Grace's blood pressure was dropping. Within seconds, the room filled with medical staff, and Amanda found herself pressed against the wall, watching helplessly as they worked to stabilize her daughter. "Come on, Grace," she whispered, feeling Pastor Morrison's steadying hand on her shoulder. "Stay with me, baby." The crisis passed, but it left Amanda shaken. That night, after the pastor had gone and the hospital had settled into its nocturnal rhythm, she finally allowed herself to break down completely. Curled up in the uncomfortable recliner beside Grace's bed, she sobbed until her throat was raw. The next morning brought more challenges. Dr. Chen arrived with the latest scan results, her expression grave. "The swelling isn't responding to treatment as we'd hoped," she explained, showing Amanda the images. "We're seeing decreased blood flow to several areas of the brain." Amanda stared at the scans, her medical training allowing her to understand the full implications. Areas of Grace's brain were dying, starved of oxygen despite all medical interventions. "What are our options?" she asked, struggling to maintain professional detachment. "We can try an experimental drug protocol," Sarah suggested. "But I need you to understand, it's a long shot, and insurance won't cover it." Another $50,000. Amanda closed her eyes, mentally calculating what she had left. Her savings were depleted, her credit cards were maxed out, and the mortgage company had already denied her application for refinancing. "Do it," she said firmly. "I'll figure out the money somehow." That afternoon, Amanda received a call from her landlord. She was 2 weeks late on rent, and while they sympathized with her situation, they couldn't continue to hold her apartment indefinitely. One more missed payment, and she would face eviction. The walls were closing in. Amanda felt like she was drowning, struggling to keep her head above water as wave after wave of crisis crashed over her. She hadn't slept properly in weeks, surviving on hospital cafeteria coffee and vending machine snacks. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes. Pastor Morrison continued to visit regularly, sometimes sitting in silence, other times sharing stories about his own journey through grief. His presence became an unexpected anchor, offering Amanda moments of peace in the storm of her despair. "You don't have to carry this alone," he told her one evening, after witnessing another frightening drop in Grace's vital signs. "The church community. We take care of our own, even those who haven't found us yet." Amanda looked at him through tears. "I don't know if I can believe in a God who would let this happen to an innocent child." "Faith isn't about understanding why things happen," John replied gently. "Sometimes it's about finding strength in the darkest moments, about believing in possibilities beyond what we can see." As the third week of Grace's coma began, Amanda felt herself approaching a breaking point. The experimental treatment had shown no improvement. The bills continued to mount, and her daughter remained locked in an unchanging twilight between life and death. One night, as the hospital settled into its quiet hours, Amanda found herself walking the corridors, her feet carrying her without conscious direction. She needed to escape the beeping monitors, the antiseptic smell, the crushing weight of reality, if only for a moment. She didn't realize she had been walking for hours until she found herself outside the hospital's small chapel, its doors standing open in silent invitation. The first light of dawn was beginning to creep through the windows, and Amanda felt something drawing her inside, a pull she couldn't explain. Little did she know, she was about to experience something that would challenge everything she believed about faith, science, and the thin line between miracles and reality. The hospital chapel stood as a quiet sentinel in the pre-dawn hours, its stained glass windows casting muted shadows across worn wooden pews. Amanda stepped inside, her footsteps echoing in the sacred silence. After 3 weeks of constant medical machinery noise, the stillness felt almost oppressive. Pastor John Morrison, who had been preparing the chapel for morning prayer, noticed her entrance but remained quietly observant near the altar. He had learned to recognize the moment when a soul reached its breaking point, and Amanda Peterson had that look in her eyes. Amanda collapsed into the front pew, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had been building for weeks. The first rays of sunrise filtered through the eastern window, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced across the altar. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm losing everything, my home, my savings, and still she won't wake up." The security cameras in the chapel's corners silently recorded as Amanda slid from the pew to her knees, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Pastor Morrison instinctively moved to comfort her, but felt an inexplicable urge to remain where he was. "Please." Amanda's voice grew stronger, filled with raw desperation. "If you're real, if you're listening, I'm not asking for myself. She's just a child. She hasn't even had a chance to live. Take everything else, but please give me back my daughter." The chapel's atmosphere seemed to shift, the air growing thick with an inexplicable presence. Pastor Morrison, who had witnessed countless prayers in his 20 years of ministry, felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "I'll do anything," Amanda continued, unaware of the changing atmosphere. "I've tried being strong, I've tried having faith, but I'm failing her. Every day I watch her slip further away, and I can't. Suddenly, the chapel filled with a brilliant light that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. The security cameras captured the phenomenon, a soft, pulsating glow that defied natural explanation. Amanda gasped as the light enveloped her. Through tears, she saw something that would forever change her understanding of reality. Grace, standing before her, whole and radiant. Her daughter wore the same pink dress from the day of the accident, but it now seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly luminescence. "Mommy," Grace's voice echoed with a clarity that transcended physical sound. "Don't cry. I'm coming home." Pastor Morrison watched in awe as the scene unfolded. In his years of ministry, he had heard countless stories of divine intervention, but witnessing it firsthand left him speechless. The security cameras continued recording as the light formed distinct patterns, taking shapes that resembled biblical descriptions of angelic beings. "Grace?" Amanda reached out, her fingers passing through the luminescent image of her daughter. "Baby, is it really you?" The vision of Grace smiled, a smile so familiar it made Amanda's heart ache. "The angels are helping me, Mommy. They're fixing what's broken." The light began to pulse more intensely, and Pastor Morrison found himself moving forward, drawn by an irresistible force. As he approached, he saw something that would challenge his theological understanding. A distinct figure standing behind Grace, wings of light extending outward, its presence both terrifying and beautiful. The security cameras captured it all, the supernatural light, the forms within it, and the moment when the entire chapel seemed to vibrate with divine energy. The digital timestamps would later prove crucial in correlating the events with what happened simultaneously at Grace's bedside. "Remember the kite, Mummy?" Grace's voice began to fade. "How it danced with the wind. That's what the angels are teaching me, how to dance back to you." Amanda felt a warmth spread through her body, a sensation of peace so profound it defied description. The light began to recede, taking the vision of Grace with it, but leaving behind an unmistakable sense of hope. Pastor Morrison moved to Amanda's side as she swayed, overwhelmed by the experience. "John," she whispered, clutching his arm, Did you see?" "Yes," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Every second of it." The chapel's security system had captured the entire event, 27 minutes of inexplicable phenomena that would soon become the subject of intense scrutiny. But in that moment, neither Amanda nor Pastor Morrison was thinking about evidence or verification. Amanda's phone broke the reverent silence, its harsh ring making them both jump. It was Sarah Chen, her voice urgent and confused. "Amanda, you need to come to the PICU immediately," Sarah said. "Something's happening with Grace. Her readings, they're changing in ways I can't explain." Amanda ran through the hospital corridors, Pastor Morrison close behind. The same light they had witnessed in the chapel seemed to guide their way, though fainter now, visible only to those who had experienced the miraculous vision. When they reached Grace's room, they found it crowded with medical staff, all staring at the monitors in disbelief. Grace's brain activity, which had been minimal for weeks, now showed patterns consistent with normal sleep rather than coma. "This is impossible," Sarah muttered, comparing the current readings to those from hours before. "The damaged areas, they're showing signs of regeneration. I've never seen anything like this." Amanda pushed through the crowd to her daughter's bedside, taking Grace's small hand in hers. She felt a slight pressure. Grace was squeezing back. "She's responding to stimuli," one of the nurses announced, her professional tone barely masking her amazement. Pastor Morrison stood in the doorway, watching as the miracle continued to unfold. He thought of his own crisis of faith following his wife's death, how he had questioned the existence of divine intervention. Now, faced with undeniable evidence of the supernatural, he felt his spiritual purpose renewed. The security footage from the chapel would later become the subject of countless analyses and debates. Experts would examine every frame, trying to explain the inexplicable light, the forms within it, and the precise correlation between the chapel events and Grace's sudden improvement. But for Amanda, the proof she needed was right in front of her. As the sun fully rose over Atlanta, painting the hospital room in shades of gold, Grace Peterson opened her eyes for the first time in 3 weeks. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had recently been removed. "I saw you in the church. The angels showed me." Amanda gathered her daughter in her arms, tears of joy streaming down her face. Pastor Morrison watched the reunion, knowing that this night would mark not only a miraculous healing, but the beginning of a profound spiritual awakening that would touch countless lives. The miracle in the church was just the beginning. In the early morning hours at Emory University Hospital's pediatric intensive care unit, the medical staff moved with practiced precision, documenting every aspect of Grace Peterson's unprecedented recovery. Dr. Sarah Chen methodically recorded her observations as she conducted a thorough neurological examination of her now conscious patient. "Can you follow my finger with your eyes, Grace?" Sarah asked, moving her index finger slowly from left to right. Grace tracked the movement perfectly, her hazel eyes clear and focused. "Excellent. Now, can you squeeze my hands?" Grace demonstrated full strength in both hands, a development that defied every medical expectation. Just hours earlier, she had been in a deep coma with severe brain damage. Now she was displaying neurological functions consistent with a healthy 4-year-old. Amanda sat beside the bed, still processing the events that had transpired in the chapel. The warmth of Grace's hand in hers served as a constant reminder that this was real, not some dream born of desperation and exhaustion. "Mommy," Grace said, her voice growing stronger with each word, "the angels showed me everything while I was sleeping. They had big, beautiful wings made of light, just like in the chapel." Sarah paused her examination, exchanging glances with Amanda. Grace, can you tell me more about what you saw? There were 3 of them, Grace continued, her face animated. They showed me how broken my brain was, like a puzzle with missing pieces, but they knew how to fix it. They said they were sending me back because Mommy needed me and because there were important things I had to do. The medical staff in the room listened intently, their professional skepticism warring with the evidence before them. Grace's description aligned perfectly with the timeline of events captured by the chapel's security cameras, despite her being physically present in the PICU during the occurrence. Dr. Sarah, Grace turned to the neurologist, the angels said to tell you that sometimes miracles happen, even when science can't explain them. They said it's okay to believe in both. Sarah Chen, who had built her career on empirical evidence and scientific methodology, found herself speechless. The morning's brain scans showed something unprecedented. Areas previously documented as necrotic tissue now appeared healthy and functional. Pastor Morrison, who had remained in the hospital after the chapel incident, entered the room with the security footage queued up on his tablet. "Amanda, I think you should see this," he said quietly, careful not to disturb the ongoing examination. The footage showed the chapel bathed in the supernatural light, the distinct forms of the angelic beings clearly visible. Most striking was the moment when Grace's ethereal form appeared, wearing the same hospital gown she currently had on, despite no one knowing what she was wearing during the vision. "That's exactly what they looked like," Grace exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "See, Mommy? I told you they were real." The next 24 hours brought a flurry of activity. Medical specialists from across the hospital came to examine Grace, each leaving more bewildered than the last. The child demonstrated not only normal cognitive function, but scored above average on several developmental tests. Her language skills appear enhanced, the speech pathologist reported. She's displaying vocabulary and comprehension well beyond her age group. The physical therapist added her observations. Muscle tone and coordination are excellent. There's no indication she spent 3 weeks immobile in a hospital bed. As news of Grace's recovery spread through the hospital, others began coming forward with their own experiences from that morning. A nurse working 3 floors below the chapel reported seeing a brilliant light shine through the ceiling. A maintenance worker described feeling an overwhelming sense of peace while passing by the chapel doors. Amanda found herself torn between joy at her daughter's recovery and anxiety about the attention it was attracting. Already, local news vans had begun gathering outside the hospital, drawn by rumors of a miraculous healing. "We need to protect her," Pastor Morrison advised, watching the growing media presence from the window. "What happened here? It's going to attract a lot of attention, both welcome and unwelcome." Sarah Chen worked tirelessly to document every aspect of Grace's recovery, knowing the medical community would demand rigorous evidence. "The changes in her brain structure are revolutionary," she explained to Amanda. "If we can understand how this happened, it could change everything we know about neurological rehabilitation." Grace, meanwhile, seemed unfazed by the commotion surrounding her. She spent the day drawing pictures of the angels she had seen, capturing details that corresponded exactly with the security footage. In one drawing, she depicted the ancient symbols that had appeared briefly in the chapel's light, symbols that would later be identified as ancient Hebrew text relating to healing and resurrection. That evening, as the hospital settled into its night routine, Amanda sat with her daughter, reading her favorite story about a brave little bird learning to fly. The normalcy of the moment brought tears to her eyes. "Mommy, don't cry," Grace said, reaching up to wipe away her mother's tears. "The angels said this was just the beginning. They said we're going to help lots of people remember how to believe in miracles." "Did they say anything else?" Amanda asked, curious about her daughter's experience during the 3 weeks she had been comatose. Grace nodded solemnly. "They showed me other people who are sad and scared like you were. They said that's why they fixed me, so we could show everyone that God still does amazing things, even when doctors say it's impossible." Pastor Morrison, who had returned to check on them, overheard Grace's words. They aligned with a vision he had experienced himself during the chapel incident, a calling to establish a ministry focused on healing and hope. "The angels were right," he said, joining them. "Your story is going to bring hope to a lot of people, Grace. But first, you need to rest and get stronger." As night fell over Atlanta, the hospital buzzed with an energy that transcended the usual medical routine. In Grace's room, the monitors showed normal vital signs, but occasionally, the electronics would flutter inexplicably, as if still responding to the residual presence of something divine. Amanda finally allowed herself to sleep in the fold-out chair beside Grace's bed, her daughter's steady breathing a lullaby of gratitude. In her dreams, she saw again the brilliant light that had filled the chapel, understanding now that it had marked not just a moment of healing, but the beginning of a journey that would challenge the boundaries between faith and science, between the possible and the miraculous. Outside the hospital windows, the city lights twinkled like earthbound stars, unaware that in a small pediatric room, the aftermath of a miracle was quietly changing the lives of all who witnessed it. The security footage from the chapel continued to loop on Pastor Morrison's tablet, its images a testament to the extraordinary events that would soon capture the world's attention and transform a small Atlanta church into a beacon of hope for thousands. The awakening was complete, but the true miracle was just beginning to unfold. News of Grace Peterson's miraculous recovery spread through Atlanta like wildfire. The morning after her awakening, the first local news crew arrived outside Emory University Hospital, their satellite van's antenna reaching toward the rising sun. By noon, all major Atlanta networks had representatives stationed at the hospital entrance, each hoping to be the first to break the story of the miracle at Emory. Dr. Sarah Chen found herself facing an unprecedented situation. As head of pediatric neurology, she was responsible for controlling the narrative of Grace's medical case, but the security footage from the hospital chapel had already begun circulating among hospital staff. "We need to approach this methodically," she told Amanda during their morning consultation. "The medical community will demand empirical evidence, and what we have here defies conventional explanation." Amanda sat beside Grace's bed, watching her daughter happily coloring a new picture of the angels. "What about the brain scans?" she asked. "Surely they prove something." Sarah spread out the before and after images on the portable table. "These scans are remarkable. The areas of necrotic tissue have completely regenerated. It's not just healing, it's as if the damage never occurred. I've sent the images to colleagues at Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic. They're all saying the same thing. This is impossible." Pastor John Morrison arrived with more pressing news. The chapel's security footage had somehow leaked online, and the video was going viral. Already, religious forums were ablaze with discussion, and biblical scholars were analyzing the Hebrew symbols that had appeared in the supernatural light. "The church has received over 500 calls since morning," he reported, running a hand through his graying hair. "People want to know if this is real, if there's proof. Some are already planning pilgrimages." Grace looked up from her drawing. "Pastor John, the angels said people would come. They said your church needs to be ready." The pastor nodded solemnly, remembering his own vision of a ministry dedicated to healing. "Yes, Grace, I believe they did." By evening, the story had reached national media attention. CNN, headquartered in Atlanta, sent their first crew to interview hospital staff. Outside, a growing crowd of believers had gathered, holding candlelight vigils and singing hymns. Amanda watched from the window as the crowd grew. "What do we do now?" she asked, feeling overwhelmed by the attention. "We need to control the narrative," Sarah advised. "The hospital board is meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation. They want to release an official statement, but they're divided on how to approach it. Half want to focus on the medical aspects, while others," she gestured to the chapel footage playing on a nearby TV, "want to acknowledge the spiritual element." The footage had become the subject of intense scrutiny. Video analysts confirmed it hadn't been tampered with, and the timestamps aligned perfectly with the hospital's medical records, showing Grace's sudden improvement. As they discussed next steps, a soft knock at the door interrupted them. A man in a dark suit entered, introducing himself as Agent Marcus Thompson from the National Institute of Health. "We're very interested in Miss Grace's case," he said, his tone professional but curious. "The implications for neurological research are staggering." Before anyone could respond, Grace spoke up. "The angels said you'd come too," she said matter-of-factly. "They said science and faith don't have to fight each other." Agent Thompson blinked, momentarily thrown off balance by the child's directness. "Did they? And what else did these angels tell you?" "They showed me how everything is connected," Grace replied, returning to her drawing. "The numbers in our bodies, the light in our souls, the love that holds it all together. They said humans try to separate things that God made to work as one." The agent took careful notes, his skepticism visibly wavering as Grace described complex theological and scientific concepts with the innocence of a 4-year-old. Meanwhile, Pastor Morrison was dealing with his own challenges. His small church had become the center of attention, with media trucks parked outside and curious visitors trying to access the chapel where the miracle had occurred. "We've had to hire security," he told Amanda. People are claiming to feel residual energy in the chapel. Some say they've seen similar lights, though nothing like what we witnessed. The hospital administration called an emergency meeting that evening. Amanda, with Grace safely watched by trusted nurses, attended alongside Dr. Chen and Pastor Morrison. The boardroom was packed with hospital executives, legal representatives, and medical experts. "We need to consider the implications carefully," the hospital's legal counsel advised. "This event could affect our reputation, our funding, our relationship with the medical community." "It's already affecting them," Sarah interjected, projecting Grace's latest test results onto the screen. "Every specialist who's examined her agrees this recovery should have been impossible. We're seeing cellular regeneration that contradicts everything we know about neuroplasticity." The debate continued for hours, but ultimately they couldn't deny the evidence before them. The hospital would release a statement acknowledging both the medical facts and the inexplicable nature of Grace's recovery. As the meeting concluded, Amanda's phone buzzed with a message from the PICU. Grace was asking for her. She rushed back to find her daughter sitting up in bed, surrounded by completed drawings. "Look, Mommy," Grace said, holding up her artwork. "I drew everything the angels showed me. They said people need to see it all together to understand." The drawings, when arranged in sequence, depicted not only the chapel event, but a series of interconnected symbols and images that seemed to bridge the gap between scientific notation and religious iconography. "She's been drawing them all evening," the night nurse whispered to Amanda. "She never hesitates or corrects anything. It's like she's copying from something only she can see." As Amanda helped Grace organize the drawings, Pastor Morrison entered the room, his face grave. "The chapel footage has reached major networks," he announced. "They're calling it the Atlanta Miracle. People are already booking flights to the city." Grace looked up, her expression serene. "It's okay," she said. "The angel said this is just the first wave. More miracles are coming, but first people need to learn how to see them." Outside the hospital, the crowd of vigil keepers had grown larger, their candles creating a sea of light in the gathering darkness. Their voices rose in hymns of praise and supplication, the sound carrying up to Grace's window. "Listen," Grace said, closing her eyes. "They're starting to remember how to believe." Amanda shared a look with Pastor Morrison and Dr. Chen. They all understood that they stood at the beginning of something much larger than themselves. The security footage from the chapel had opened a door that couldn't be closed, challenging the boundaries between faith and science, between the possible and the miraculous. As night fell over Atlanta, the first wave of pilgrims began arriving at the airport, drawn by the viral footage and the promise of witnessing something divine. In Grace's hospital room, the drawings continued to multiply, each one a piece of a larger message that would soon captivate the world. The repercussions of the miracle were just beginning to unfold, and none of them could predict where this path would lead. The day of Grace's discharge from Emory University Hospital arrived with both celebration and apprehension. The morning sun cast long shadows through the hospital windows as Amanda helped her daughter pack the countless drawings that had accumulated over their stay. Each illustration, filled with complex symbols and angelic figures, had been carefully documented by both medical researchers and theological scholars. Dr. Sarah Chen conducted one final examination, still amazed by Grace's complete recovery. "All her neurological functions are not just normal, they're exceptional," she reported, reviewing the latest test results. "Her cognitive abilities have actually increased since the incident." Grace sat on the edge of the hospital bed, swinging her legs cheerfully. "That's because the angels didn't just fix what was broken," she explained with childlike simplicity. "They made everything better, so we could help more people." The hospital corridor outside was lined with security personnel, necessary to manage the growing crowd of visitors, hoping to catch a glimpse of the miracle child. Over the past week, Grace's story had exploded across national media, with the chapel security footage being analyzed on major networks. Pastor John Morrison arrived early to help with the discharge process, his presence having become a constant source of support. The small church where the miracle occurred had been transformed into a center of pilgrimage, with hundreds of visitors arriving daily. "The church council has approved the establishment of a healing ministry," he informed Amanda quietly. "We've already received donations from across the country. People are desperate for hope." As they prepared to leave, Grace suddenly became very still, her expression turning serious. "They're here," she whispered, looking toward the corner of the room. Amanda and Pastor Morrison followed her gaze, and though they saw nothing, the air seemed to shimmer with an inexplicable presence. "The angels want me to tell you something," Grace continued, her voice taking on the clear, confident tone that had become familiar when she spoke of her celestial experiences. "They say this is just the beginning of your transformation too, Mommy. And yours, Pastor John." Before either adult could respond, the room's electronics flickered briefly, a phenomenon that had become common around Grace since her awakening. The child smiled, as if sharing a secret with unseen friends. The journey from the hospital room to the parking garage was carefully orchestrated. Hospital security had cleared a path, but they could still hear the crowd outside, their voices raised in prayer and song. News helicopters circled overhead, their cameras trained on the hospital exits. As they approached Pastor Morrison's car, Grace suddenly stopped. "Wait," she said, turning toward a woman who had somehow slipped past security. The woman stood trembling, clutching medical papers in her hands. "Please," the woman begged, tears streaming down her face. "My son. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. I saw the footage. I just need to know if it's real, if there's hope." Before anyone could intervene, Grace walked to the woman and took her hand. "The angels say David is going to be okay," she said softly. "They want you to go to the chapel tonight at midnight. They'll be waiting." The woman gasped. She hadn't mentioned her son's name. Amanda and Pastor Morrison exchanged glances, understanding that Grace's transformation went far beyond physical healing. That evening, settled in the temporary apartment the church had arranged for them, Amanda watched her daughter drawing yet another series of intricate patterns. "Grace, sweetheart, how do you know these things?" Grace looked up, her eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond her years. "The angels didn't just show me pictures, Mommy. They showed me how everything connects. They said I needed to understand so I could help others understand too." A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Dr. Chen, clutching a folder of test results. "Amanda, you need to see this," she said, spreading the papers on the kitchen table. "We've been comparing Grace's brain scans with historical cases of miraculous healings. There's a pattern emerging. The scans showed unusual activity in areas of the brain typically associated with spiritual experiences. But in Grace's case, these areas appeared permanently enhanced. It's as if her brain has been rewired," Sarah explained. "Not just healed, but upgraded, for lack of a better term." Pastor Morrison arrived later that night with news from the chapel. The woman with the sick son had come as Grace had said, and witnesses reported seeing the same mysterious light that had appeared during Grace's miracle. "Her son's doctors are baffled," he reported. "The latest tests show his cancer is responding to treatment in ways they've never seen." Amanda felt overwhelmed by the implications. Her daughter, once a typical 4-year-old, had become a bridge between the physical and spiritual realms. The medical community was struggling to explain Grace's abilities, while religious leaders debated their theological significance. "The angels say, we shouldn't worry," Grace announced, not looking up from her drawing. "They say everything is happening exactly as it should. The hard part isn't doing the miracles, it's helping people believe in them again." Over the next few days, more reports of inexplicable healings emerged from the chapel. Each case followed a similar pattern. Grace would identify someone in need, provide specific instructions about when to visit the chapel, and during their visits, the same mysterious light would appear. Dr. Chen continued her research, documenting each case with scientific precision. "We're seeing a ripple effect," she explained to Amanda. "It's not just the physical healings. People exposed to these events are experiencing profound psychological and spiritual transformations." Pastor Morrison found his own faith deepening as he witnessed these events. The loss of his wife had left him questioning God's presence, but through grace, he was rediscovering the raw power of belief. His sermons began attracting hundreds of visitors, each seeking to understand the miracles unfolding in their midst. One evening, as Amanda tucked Grace into bed, her daughter shared another revelation. "The angels say your healing is almost complete too, Mommy." "My healing?" Amanda asked, surprised. "But I wasn't injured." Grace smiled knowingly. "Not all broken things can be seen on doctors' machines. The angels have been fixing your heart, helping you remember how to believe in beautiful things." Amanda realized the truth in her daughter's words. The hardened skepticism she had developed through years of medical practice had softened, replaced by an understanding that some things transcended scientific explanation. As moonlight filtered through the apartment windows, Amanda sat with Pastor Morrison and Dr. Chen, discussing the growing impact of Grace's gift. The medical board had approved a formal study of the healings, while religious leaders from various faiths sought to understand their significance. "We're standing at a crossroads," Pastor Morrison observed. "Science and faith are being challenged to cooperate in ways we've never seen before." Grace's voice drifted from her bedroom. "The angels say that's exactly what they wanted. When people stop fighting about how miracles happen and just let them happen, that's when everything will change." The transformation was indeed spreading, touching lives far beyond the walls of the small Atlanta church. And through it all, Grace continued drawing her mysterious symbols, each one a piece of a larger message that was slowly being revealed to the world. The personal transformations taking place were just the beginning of a movement that would challenge the boundaries between science and faith, between the possible and the miraculous. And at its center was a small child who spoke with angels, her own transformation serving as a beacon of hope for countless others seeking their own miracles. The bright lights of the CNN studio cast harsh shadows as Amanda and Grace Peterson prepared for their first national television interview. 3 months had passed since the miracle at Emory University Hospital, and the story had grown far beyond their small Atlanta community. "Remember," Pastor John Morrison counseled, adjusting his tie nervously, "we're here to share the truth, nothing more, nothing less." Grace, dressed in a simple blue dress, sat calmly in the makeup chair. "The angels say not everyone will believe," she said softly, "but that's okay. They just want us to plant the seeds." The interview began with the chapel footage, now seen by millions worldwide. The host, Rebecca Martinez, leaned forward intently. "Dr. Sarah Chen, as a neurologist, how do you explain what we're seeing?" Sarah, who had agreed to join the interview, chose her words carefully. "Medically speaking, Grace's recovery defies every established principle of neurology. The regeneration of dead brain tissue, the enhanced cognitive functions, there's no scientific precedent for this. And yet," Rebecca pressed, "some in the medical community are calling this a hoax, suggesting the original diagnosis was incorrect." Before Sarah could respond, Grace spoke up. "The angels knew people would doubt. That's why they left proof in the numbers." The studio fell silent as Grace pulled out one of her drawings, a complex series of mathematical equations interwoven with ancient Hebrew symbols. Dr. James Harrison, a renowned physicist who had been studying Grace's drawings, stepped forward. "These equations," he explained, displaying them on the studio's screens, "describe quantum entanglement in ways we're only beginning to understand. The mathematical concepts here are far beyond what any 4-year-old could know." Rebecca turned to Amanda. "As a medical professional yourself, how do you reconcile your scientific training with what you've witnessed?" Amanda took a deep breath, remembering the countless similar questions she'd faced. "I've learned that the universe is far more mysterious than our limited understanding. What happened in that chapel wasn't just a physical healing, it was a reminder that there are truths beyond our current scientific framework." The interview was interrupted by breaking news. The Vatican had announced an official investigation into the events at Atlanta. The Catholic Church's interest had been piqued by reports of continued miraculous healings at Pastor Morrison's chapel. "Grace," Rebecca asked gently, "what do you say to those who claim you're too young to understand what's happening?" Grace smiled, her expression serene. "Age doesn't matter to the angels. They say truth is like light. It shines the same for everyone who's willing to see it." As the interview continued, social media exploded with reactions. Skeptics pointed to inconsistencies they claimed to find in the story, while believers shared their own experiences of unexplained phenomena at the chapel. Dr. Marcus Thompson from the NIH appeared via satellite, presenting the latest research findings. "We've documented 27 cases of medically verified healings associated with the chapel. Each case follows a pattern that defies statistical probability." The controversy intensified when a group of prominent scientists published an open letter denouncing the mass hysteria surrounding Grace's case. They demanded access to all medical records and chapel security footage for independent verification. Grace's response to their skepticism was unexpected. During a commercial break, she drew a detailed diagram of a new theoretical particle that the scientists had been secretly researching, information she couldn't possibly have known. "How did you know about this?" Dr. Harrison asked, astounded. "The angels showed me. They say it's the particle that connects consciousness to reality. You'll find it when you build the new collider in 2026. The scientific community was thrown into chaos by this revelation. The plans for the new particle collider had been classified, yet Grace's drawing included specific details about its design. Back home in Atlanta, the pressure mounted. Protesters began gathering outside Pastor Morrison's church, demanding proof that the miracles were real. Some carried signs denouncing what they called religious exploitation of a child. Amanda struggled with the increasing scrutiny. One evening, as she watched Grace drawing her mysterious symbols, she voiced her fears. Maybe we should step back from the public eye for a while. Grace looked up, her eyes filled with understanding beyond her years. The angels said this would happen. They said doubt is like a storm. It has to come before the rainbow appears. Pastor Morrison, who had become both spiritual advisor and family friend, arrived with more challenging news. Several families who claimed their healing experiences were fake had filed a lawsuit against the church. They're saying we orchestrated everything, he explained heavily. They want us to prove the miracles scientifically. Dr. Chen, who had been documenting each case meticulously, offered her support. We have the medical evidence. Every healing has been verified by independent physicians. But the controversy continued to grow. Major media outlets began running exposés questioning everything from Grace's original diagnosis to the authenticity of the chapel footage. Social media was flooded with conspiracy theories and attempted debunkings. The pressure reached its peak when a prominent skeptic organization offered $1 million to anyone who could prove the healings were genuine under controlled conditions. Grace's response surprised everyone. Tell them to bring their machines to the chapel next Sunday at midnight. The angels say they're ready to be measured. The scientific community mobilized. Teams of researchers arrived with sophisticated equipment designed to detect any form of energy or radiation. The chapel was wired with sensors, cameras, and monitoring devices. As midnight approached, the chapel filled with an unusual mix of scientists, believers, and skeptics. Grace sat quietly in the front pew, holding her mother's hand. "Watch," she whispered, as the clock struck 12. What happened next would change the debate forever. The sophisticated equipment recorded massive energy spikes as the familiar light filled the chapel. But this time, something was different. The light formed distinct patterns that matched exactly with Grace's drawings. More remarkably, every piece of electronic equipment in the chapel captured the same data, making fraud or manipulation impossible. The energy patterns defied known physics, exhibiting properties that suggested interaction with dimensions beyond our current understanding. In that moment of undeniable evidence, the boundary between faith and science began to blur. The skeptic organization's representative stood speechless as their own instruments recorded what could only be described as a miracle. Grace's voice carried through the stunned silence. The angels say this is just the beginning. Now that you can measure the light, you'll start to see it everywhere. The trial of faith had brought them to a turning point. As dawn broke over Atlanta, the world began to grapple with a new reality, one where science and spirituality weren't opposing forces, but different languages describing the same divine truth. The storm of doubt had passed, but the rainbow Grace promised was just beginning to appear. The morning after the scientific documentation of the chapel phenomenon, Atlanta awoke to a changed world. Major scientific journals were rushing to publish the data collected during the midnight demonstration, while theological institutions grappled with its implications. Grace's prediction about seeing the light everywhere began materializing in unexpected ways. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her office at Emory University Hospital, reviewing the latest batch of medical anomalies. Since the chapel incident, hospitals across Georgia had reported inexplicable healing events. Each case followed a pattern similar to Grace's original miracle. The energy signatures are identical, she explained to Amanda and Pastor Morrison, spreading out readings from various locations. Whatever happened in the chapel that night has sparked some kind of chain reaction. Grace, who had been quietly drawing in the corner, looked up. The angels say it's like dropping a stone in water. The ripples keep spreading, touching everyone who's ready to receive them. The first confirmed case appeared at a hospital in Savannah. A terminal cancer patient reported seeing a bright light in her room at midnight, accompanied by what she described as singing that felt like light. The next morning, her scans showed complete remission. Similar reports began flooding in from across the southeast. Each incident was accompanied by the same energy signature that scientists had recorded in the chapel. More remarkably, security cameras at these locations captured footage of the mysterious light, though the angelic forms remained visible only in the original chapel recordings. Pastor Morrison's church had become the epicenter of what the media dubbed the miracle wave. Researchers from leading institutions set up permanent monitoring stations, documenting every manifestation of the phenomenon. "Look at this," Dr. James Harrison said, pointing to his latest analysis. "The energy patterns aren't random. They're forming a larger pattern. like a tapestry of light spreading across the region. Grace nodded, unsurprised. The angels say healing isn't just for bodies. They're healing the spaces between people, the places where faith and understanding got broken. The scientific community, initially divided over the chapel demonstration, now faced compelling evidence that defied conventional explanation. The energy signatures exhibited properties that suggested interaction with theoretical dimensions previously considered purely mathematical constructs. One evening, as Grace worked on a new series of drawings, she made an announcement that stunned everyone. "Tomorrow night, all the lights will come together. The angels say it's time for everyone to see what they've been building." Word spread quickly. By sunset the next day, thousands had gathered in and around the church. Scientists had their instruments ready, while religious leaders from various faiths joined in prayer. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. At precisely midnight it began. The now familiar light appeared simultaneously at every location where a healing had occurred, creating a network of luminous connections visible from space. Satellite imagery would later show a perfect geometric pattern covering much of the southeastern United States. Inside the chapel, Grace stood calmly as the light filled the space. "Watch," she said softly. "They're showing us how everything connects." The light began to pulse in rhythm, and those present reported experiencing what they could only describe as visible music, patterns of light that translated directly into harmonic frequencies. The scientific instruments recorded vibrational patterns that matched precisely with Grace's earlier drawings. More extraordinary were the healings that occurred that night. Hundreds reported simultaneous experiences of physical, emotional, and spiritual healing. Each case was documented with medical precision, creating an unprecedented database of miraculous interventions. "The physics are revolutionary," Dr. Harrison explained to the gathered press. "We're observing quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale, suggesting consciousness itself might be a quantum phenomenon." Pastor Morrison found his ministry transformed. The church became a center for studying the integration of science and spirituality, with researchers and religious scholars working side by side to understand the implications of what they were witnessing. Grace's drawings, he noted, aren't just illustrations, they're blueprints for understanding how divine intervention interfaces with physical reality. The confluence of miracles reached its peak when the pattern of light manifested a three-dimensional structure visible to all present. It matched exactly with a drawing Grace had created months earlier, which scientists now recognized as a model of higher dimensional space-time interactions. "The angels say this is how they see our world," Grace explained, pointing to specific points in the luminous structure. All the threads of time and space woven together by love. The event marked a turning point in human understanding. Scientists began developing new theoretical frameworks that incorporated spiritual dimensions alongside physical ones. Religious institutions found their faith strengthened rather than threatened by scientific validation. Dr. Chen's research team made a groundbreaking discovery while analyzing the data. "The energy signatures," she explained, "they're not just affecting physical matter, they're actually altering the quantum field itself, creating permanent changes in the fabric of reality." Grace's response to this revelation was characteristically simple. "That's because love changes everything it touches. The angels say that's the biggest miracle of all." As the night of convergence ended, those present understood they had witnessed something beyond the ordinary definition of miracle. They had seen the membrane between heaven and earth become momentarily transparent, revealing the intricate dance of divine and natural law. The confluence of miracles had demonstrated that the supernatural wasn't a violation of natural law, but rather its fulfillment. Grace's role as a bridge between worlds had catalyzed a transformation in human understanding that would resonate for generations to come. "Remember," Grace told the assembled crowd as the light began to fade, "the angels say this isn't the end. It's just the first chapter in a new story we're all writing together." The world would never be quite the same after that night. The convergence of science and spirituality had opened doors that could never be closed, and the ripples of grace that began in a small Atlanta chapel continued to spread, touching lives and transforming understanding in ways that even the angels might not have foreseen. A chilly autumn wind swept through Atlanta as dark clouds gathered over Pastor Morrison's church. 6 months had passed since the night of convergence, and the world was still grappling with its implications, but forces of opposition were mounting, threatening to undermine everything that had been achieved. Dr. Marcus Thompson stood before a Senate committee in Washington, defending the scientific validity of the documented miracles. The data is irrefutable, he insisted, pointing to charts and graphs. We've recorded over 1,000 verified cases of spontaneous healing, all exhibiting the same quantum signature first documented in the chapel. But his testimony was immediately challenged by Dr. Victor Reeves, a prominent skeptic whose new book, Debunking the Atlanta Miracle, had become a bestseller. What we're seeing is mass hysteria combined with technological manipulation, Reeves argued. These so-called miracles can be explained through perfectly natural phenomena. Back in Atlanta, Grace sat in her new classroom at a private school that had agreed to accommodate her unique circumstances. Her teacher had just finished reading Reeves's latest public statement, attacking the validity of her experiences. "The angels say he's afraid," Grace commented quietly, drawing complex patterns in her notebook. "Not of us, but of what it means if he's wrong about everything he believes." Amanda, watching her daughter from the doorway, felt a familiar mix of pride and concern. The public scrutiny had intensified, with skeptics demanding increasingly rigorous tests and proof. Some had even suggested that Grace's abilities were the result of sophisticated technology or careful manipulation. That evening, as they drove home, Grace suddenly became very still. "They're coming," she said, her voice carrying that otherworldly clarity that always accompanied angelic communication. "The ones who want to stop the light from spreading." Pastor Morrison called an emergency meeting at the church. The core group gathered: Amanda, Dr. Chen, Dr. Harrison, and several other researchers who had dedicated themselves to studying the phenomena. "We've detected unusual energy patterns," Dr. Harrison reported, showing readings from their monitoring equipment. "Something is interfering with the quantum field we've been studying." Grace walked to the center of the chapel, her small figure casting a long shadow in the evening light. "The angels say this is the test they prepared us for. The darkness always fights hardest just before dawn." As if in response to her words, the chapel's lights flickered and died. The monitoring equipment went haywire, displaying readings that made no scientific sense. Through the windows, they could see similar power fluctuations affecting the entire neighborhood. "It's some kind of electromagnetic interference," Dr. Chen suggested, but Grace shook her head. "It's doubt," she said simply, "not just from people's minds, but from the spaces between reality where fear lives. The angels say we have to face it together." The interference spread rapidly. Within hours, reports came in from hospitals across the region. The healing phenomena had stopped. The beautiful patterns of light that had become a regular occurrence vanished, leaving only darkness. Dr. Reeves appeared on national television, claiming vindication. "See, when subjected to proper scrutiny, these miracles disappear. It was all an elaborately staged performance." The pressure became intense. Former supporters began to question their experiences. Some who had been healed reported their symptoms returning. The media turned hostile, with headlines suggesting fraud and manipulation. Amanda found herself questioning everything. "Grace, sweetheart, what's happening?" Her daughter looked up from a new drawing, this one darker, filled with swirling patterns that seemed to consume the light. "The angels say sometimes you have to let the darkness come so people can remember why they needed the light." Pastor Morrison, who had weathered his own crisis of faith years before, understood. "This isn't just about proving the miracles are real," he said. "It's about choosing to believe even when it's hardest." That night, as skeptics celebrated what they saw as the end of the Atlanta hoax, Grace made an announcement that silenced everyone in the chapel. "Tomorrow at midnight," she said, "the angels want all the doubters to come. Bring your machines, your questions, and your fears. It's time for the final test." Word spread quickly. Dr. Reeves himself flew in, bringing a team of experts and sophisticated detection equipment. Media outlets from around the world converged on the small church. The scientific community waited with bated breath. As midnight approached, Grace stood calmly in the center of the chapel, surrounded by monitoring devices and skeptical observers. The tension in the air was palpable. "Before we begin," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "the angels want you to know something. Faith isn't about erasing doubt. It's about finding light even when the darkness seems strongest." At exactly midnight, every piece of equipment in the chapel failed simultaneously. The darkness was absolute. In that moment of complete blackness, something extraordinary happened. The light that appeared was different from before. Instead of coming from outside, it seemed to emerge from within each person present. Dr. Reeves, standing at the back with his instruments, found himself surrounded by a glow that emanated from his own chest. "This," Grace explained, is what the angels wanted you to see. The miracle isn't in the machines or the measurements. It's in you. It always has been. The light grew stronger, and with it came understanding. Those present experienced not just physical healing, but a profound transformation of consciousness. They saw with perfect clarity the interconnection of all things, science and faith, doubt and belief, darkness and light. Dr. Reeves dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. The devices he had brought to disprove the miracle now recorded something he could no longer deny: the divine presence that had always existed, waiting to be recognized. The final test had revealed the greatest truth of all. The miracle wasn't just about proving the existence of angels or documenting supernatural phenomena. It was about awakening humanity to its own divine nature, about bridging the artificial gap between heaven and earth. As the light filled every corner of darkness, Grace smiled. The angels say this is just the beginning. Now that you can see the light in yourselves, you'll never be afraid of the dark again. The miracle had come full circle. What began as one child's healing had become a transformation of collective consciousness, a reminder that the greatest miracles often come disguised as our deepest challenges. The dawn was finally breaking. 1 year after the final test at Pastor Morrison's church, Atlanta had been transformed. The small chapel where it all began had evolved into the International Center for Spiritual and Scientific Research, ICSSR, a groundbreaking institution where researchers and spiritual leaders worked together to understand the intersection of faith and physics. Grace Peterson, now 5 years old, sat in the center's main auditorium, watching as her mother addressed the inaugural World Congress on Quantum Spirituality. Amanda had grown into her role as a bridge between the medical and mystical communities, her personal journey from skeptic to believer resonating with audiences worldwide. The miracle that began in our chapel was never just about healing bodies, Amanda explained to the assembled crowd. It was about healing the rift between faith and reason, between what we can measure and what we can feel. Dr. Victor Reeves, once the world's most prominent skeptic, now stood beside Amanda as the center's head of empirical research. His transformation during the final test had become legendary, inspiring other scientists to approach spiritual phenomena with open minds. Our latest findings, he announced, displaying complex data streams on the giant screens, show that the quantum signatures first documented during Grace's healing have become a permanent feature of our reality. The membrane between dimensions has been permanently altered. Grace smiled, adding another detail to the drawing in her lap. The angels had shown her this moment long ago, but seeing it unfold still filled her with joy. The pattern she was drawing showed the next phase of what the angels had planned. Pastor Morrison, who had weathered every storm alongside the Petersons, now led an international ministry focused on integrating spiritual wisdom with scientific advancement. His small church had become a beacon of hope for millions seeking to understand their own encounters with the divine. The greatest legacy of our miracle, he reflected, isn't in the documented healings or the scientific breakthroughs. It's in the way it changed how we see ourselves and our place in the universe. As if to emphasize his words, the familiar light began to fill the auditorium, but now no one was surprised. The manifestation of divine energy had become a regular occurrence, though no less miraculous. People had simply learned to recognize and welcome it. "The angels want me to share something," Grace announced, her voice carrying in the hushed space. "They say the story that began in Atlanta was just the first chapter. There are more books to be written, more miracles to discover." Dr. Sarah Chen, who had meticulously documented every case since Grace's initial healing, presented her comprehensive findings. "We've recorded over 10,000 verified healings worldwide. Each one exhibits the same quantum signature, but each is also uniquely adapted to the individual's needs." The scientific community had developed new frameworks to understand these phenomena. Universities offered degrees in quantum theology, while medical schools incorporated spiritual healing into their curricula. The wall between science and faith had not just been breached, it had been transformed into a bridge. "Look," Grace said suddenly, pointing to her drawing. "They're showing us the pattern for what comes next." The image she had created showed an intricate web of light, connecting every corner of the globe. According to Grace, it represented the next phase of human evolution, a transformation of consciousness that would allow people to perceive the spiritual dimension as naturally as the physical one. Amanda watched her daughter with tears of gratitude. The frightened mother who had once knelt in a hospital chapel, begging for a miracle, had been transformed just as profoundly as the world around her. She understood now that the greatest miracles weren't the ones that defied physical laws, but those that revealed the divine laws underlying all of reality. Dr. Harrison, whose physics research had been revolutionized by the events in Atlanta, presented his unified theory of spiritual quantum mechanics. "We're not just observing these phenomena anymore," he explained. "We're learning to work with them, to participate in the dance between matter and spirit." The ICSSR had become a model for similar centers around the world. People came from every nation, bringing their own traditions and insights to add to the growing understanding of how faith and science could work together. Grace's drawings, now numbering in the thousands, had been compiled into a comprehensive archive that researchers studied alongside ancient spiritual texts. The patterns she depicted seemed to unlock mysteries that humanity had pondered for millennia. "The angels say their work here is almost complete," Grace announced as the Congress drew to a close. "They've shown us how to see the light. Now we have to choose to keep looking for it." The legacy of the Atlanta miracle continued to unfold in unexpected ways. Hospitals reported increased recovery rates, even in cases where no obvious intervention occurred. People began developing heightened spiritual awareness naturally, as if the veil between worlds had indeed grown thinner. Pastor Morrison's final address to the Congress summed up the transformation they had witnessed. "We stand at the dawn of a new age, not one where faith replaces science or science disproves faith, but where both reveal different aspects of the same divine truth." As the sun set over Atlanta, casting golden light through the chapel's stained glass windows, Grace added the final touch to her drawing. The pattern was complete, showing the next phase of the miracle that had begun with one child's healing and grown to encompass all of humanity. "The angels say this is their gift to us," she explained, holding up the drawing. "Not just the miracles or the healings, but the reminder that heaven and earth were never really separate. We just needed to learn how to see them both at once." Amanda hugged her daughter, understanding that their journey had been both an ending and a beginning. The miracle that had saved Grace's life had rippled outward, touching countless others and transforming the world's understanding of what was possible. As night fell, the familiar light filled the chapel one last time, but now everyone present could see what Grace had always seen, that the light was everywhere in everything and everyone. The miracle hadn't changed reality, it had simply taught them to see it as it truly was. The legacy would continue, passed down through generations, as humanity continued to explore the endless dance between science and spirit, between the measurable and the miraculous. And somewhere the angels watched, knowing their work was complete. The story that began with a mother's desperate prayer had become a testament to the power of faith, the wonder of science, and the eternal truth that love remains the greatest miracle of all. Did Grace's miraculous story touch your heart? Share below how faith and science have intersected in your own life experiences. Has your faith ever been tested like Amanda's? Your story could inspire others who are seeking their own miracles.